Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest edition of the Woke Bros. Of course, I'm your co-host, Big Wos, aka Wosley Lambre, and I'm joined by my brother, my partner on the west side of Los Angeles. What's going on, Nando?
Doing all right, man. Can't complain. Living the dream out here. How about you, baby?
Of course, same old same. We're here, we're chilling. Cannot complain about it, man. On today's show, a big victory in Brazil. Lula da Silva back again somehow, president of Brazil. We're gonna talk about why that's just a huge deal, a huge victory for the left. Like, there's no other way to paint that. Kind of crazy when you think about the journey from this guy doing 2 terms, then becoming a political prisoner, getting out and winning again. This is a movie. So we're gonna talk about that. Uh, but first, man, we want to talk about something that I don't think is getting a lot of press right now in the news, but is a pretty big deal. The Supreme Court is about to hear a case about affirmative action and whether to strike it down. It's it's so funny. It's coming from a conservative group and a group that professes to represent the interests of Asian American students at large, and it's based on this idea that Harvard and other elite institutions during their admissions process, uh, they fucking they excluded Asians. They discriminated against Asians. Um, and to artificially make their campuses and stuff like that more diverse. And it's just a whole bunch of stuff, Nando. And I think there's a lot of stuff here that is right in line with things that we talk about every single day in terms of like these race-based programs and who the benefits actually accrue to. We can
Yeah.
talk about that, but I think the spicy part here is this idea that these conservatives have figured out, like, no, let's get Asians on board here to make our case more diverse. And I think that's the spiciest element to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I think like when people think of affirmative action, the way it's implemented, I think is indicative of like what you said, a lot of the stuff we talk about on this program. I'm just gonna read a couple stats to you really quickly. 71% of Harvard's Black and Hispanic students come from wealthy backgrounds.
Mhm.
You know, they are they are the beneficiaries of affirmative action. Just a little more. First and second generation African immigrants, despite constituting only about 10% of the US Black population, make up 41% of all Black students in the Ivy League, right? So, obviously the intention of affirmative action was to help the descendants of, like the Black descendants of slaves, right? Like the victims of American, the American slave trade and things like that. But the way it works in practice, because it's purely race based and not economics based, the son of the Ghanaian ambassador to to the United States, for example, is benefiting from affirmative action over the kid who grew up, in Compton or whatever. Um, and I think that that's just shows the limits of the political imagination that a lot of this liberal worldview has. That if you just diversify from a superficial level rather than from an economic level, you'll achieve liberation. And I think like the results speak for themselves. Like affirmative action has not led to a meaningful benefit to the majority of the people that it's purported to help. It's obviously helped some people, and on a very narrow kind of margin. But on the whole, the program is not something that liberated the oppressed Black minority in this country.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing here. I think if this affirmative action, as it was supposed to work, was like this thing that targeted the most neediest of all Black people. And because again, it's supposed to address the historical iniquities that the country has put upon Black people. I think, yeah, we would be all for it, right? But as it stands now, it's just a way for elite institutions to market themselves as multicultural. And that's to both the students who attend and their parents, right? And I don't know how important that is, right? And another thing about it, um, that becomes problematic is like, do we really want to get in? I think Jay Kang, former Woke Bros guest, does a good job of this. Do we really want to get into the weeds of parsing the levels of Black oppression? Like, no, you're from, all Nigerian immigrants who were well off, blah blah blah. We don't need to help you. You're from this type of Black person. Like, I don't even know that we want to be getting into the weeds with that. And
No.
like, to my mind, this stuff is really the problems of really well off, fortunate people. Most colleges and universities let in most of the kids that apply to them. You can have a great experience. You can get a pretty good education at most of them. I think the affordability of this stuff is becoming problematic. But like, as far as affirmative action and shit like Harvard and University of Michigan and other sort of elite institutions, I don't think this is a thing.
Again, yeah, like if you really want to help oppressed minorities in this country or oppressed people anywhere, things like Medicare for all, broad-based social programs, even Medicare itself, Social Security, these broad-based social programs that benefit all people, both are not only, the actual things that will uplift people out of poverty and oppression, but also the most durable politically, right? Affirmative action is going to die because there is no one defending affirmative action. There's no coalition to defend affirmative action. There's no one whose self-interest on a mass level is depends on defending from affirmative action. Therefore, it eventually becomes a target of the right wing, and it's an easy defeat. An easy defeat. Whereas privatizing Social Security, which has been a dream of Democrats and Republicans for 30 years, somehow doesn't happen because there is a broad-based social
Mhm.
political bloc that is self-interested in defending it, therefore will defend it tooth and nail. You know what I mean? I think it's just a lesson in basic political efficacy, but also in what real emancipation looks like. Um, a an increase in the minimum wage, and things that just benefit a broad swath of the population. Giant cash transfers from the rich to the poor, whether that's in the form of Social Security or some sort of government benefit for other things. Like if there was a child care benefit, like if you just got a check in the mail from the government, $1,000 if you have a kid, you know what I mean, every month type of thing. You know what I mean? Like that would be just an unbelievably popular program that would be very difficult to dismantle because there would be this huge coalition of people who would fight to defend it. Um, Things like affirmative action, which saw the path towards you know escaping poverty through an elite education. That's just not how that
That's
works.
not
It spurs
viable
those
for a large
people.
group of people.
Exactly. All it does is reinforce inequalities, right?
Mhm.
If everyone went to Harvard, then Harvard would stop being special. That's just the reality of it.
And we had Bert Cooper on, and he talked about this months ago when he was on the program. Just this idea that the benefits of these race based programs accrue to the people who have the means to access those benefits, right? Who are able to go out and they know how to do it. They know how to play the game. They're of the culture of these elite institutions, and they can win. Like, they can win, they can get it right, they can achieve all of the sort of what is asked of you. The answers going in because you are of those institutions. Like, you might be a third and fourth generation college student, right, who's a Black person. If you come out of that, it's going to be much easier for you to access this minority sort of race based program kind of stuff. And normal people, they don't have access to this stuff, and they're not going to win that way. And while I understand why a lot of people are going to be hurt to see affirmative action fall, I think in the broader sense, I don't know that this, again, actually, I do know this was not helping a wide swath of disaffected people. So yeah, I think the message here is clear. Affirmative action sort of stopped doing the job that it was intended to do a while ago. Sucks that the way that it's happening, I understand the parties that are involved, especially this one guy, I forget his name right now, who was behind the Shelby County getting voting rights turned. Basically, him being the guy that's spearheading this. I understand why people get upset by it. But this thing wasn't doing the job of the people on the ground, man. It was doing the job of the work of the elites, and
Yeah.
I don't know that we should be too, bent out of shape about it. But let's move on, man, to legitimate good news in the world of the left. Man, Lula da Silva, he takes down Bolsonaro, who he tried to do his little Trump thing of I'm not conceding, blah blah blah, but he's already put in the mechanisms to abdicate the presidency, and he's moving on. And Lula's about to be president again, of course, man. Rest in peace. Shout out to my brother Michael Brooks, who, if not for him, I know for a fact, me myself personally, I would not be so plugged in to what is happening in Brazil, particularly with Lula's brand of leftism. And so to see this guy again win, bring tens of millions of Brazilians out of poverty in his 2 terms in office over there in Brazil, get out, go to jail, be jailed by his political opponents, get out, and then win again. This is
Yeah.
beautiful, Nando.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I mean, it's been said before, and our brother Michael would always talk about this, and that Lula da Silva is probably the greatest politician of our lifetime. Certainly,
Yeah.
easily. I mean, I mean, beyond beating Bolsonaro in this election, 2 years removed from being sitting in a fucking prison cell. Okay, think about that for a second. Um, Lula da Silva is probably the person that is most responsible for bringing down Brazil's military dictatorship. Brazil had a military dictatorship from 1954 through the mid 80s. It officially ended in 1989, kind of started ending in the mid 80s. But in the late 70s, Lula emerged as the leader of the trade union movement that was the forefront of opposing the military dictatorship. Lula is an uneducated factory worker from northeastern Brazil. He does not come from the power centers of Brazil, Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. He comes from the northeast. He was a factory worker. I think he worked in an auto plant. He lost his finger. He's missing a finger that he got cut off in an auto plant. Emerged as a really heroic union leader that organized a series of wildcat strikes against like a corrupt union leadership that really mobilized the entire country. It's just like a remarkable political story. And then in the early 2000s became president of Brazil. I believe Brazil is the third largest democracy in the world after India and the United States. It's a huge country. It's over 200 million people. There's more people in Brazil than the rest of South America combined. He became president of Brazil and led this remarkable transformation in which he just lifted millions of people out of poverty by basically giving them money. Simple, broad-based social programs like we were talking about. He, instituted some taxes and then just instituted like just a benefit for the poor. They put money in their pockets,
Yeah.
and he was brought down in a really bullshit scandal, quote unquote, sent to jail in just like a really heinous, just fucking bullshit. Like some fucking, they claimed that he got like a free renovation on an apartment that was like even that, like, it's like, come on. It was just a pure
And
hatchet job.
some of the stuff that was going on in American press about Lula da Silva is like, oh, this guy's corrupt, this blah 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 blah. And again, it leaves out the part where he did the legitimate work of lifting tens of millions of Brazilians out of poverty. It's like, no, in Brazil, that's just doing business.
Yeah.
Like that's the cost of doing business. You might have to pay off some corrupt bureaucrat or whatever so that you can go about doing the business of the people.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's just how it works. You talk about, I think about stuff, and we've talked about it on the show, stuff like the Teamsters, where they would say, oh, the Teamsters, they smear them and be like, these motherfuckers are mobbed up, they're thugs, and they're this and they're that, and leave out the part where it's like, no, the bosses were the first to call thugs on union workers, trying to picket, trying to strike, trying to get better deals for themselves. They're the one trying to get in the way of scabs. The bosses called the goons in first. And the union was like, yo, how do we sort of, fight against this? And they bring the mob in. I think it's sort of the same idea there. You know what I mean? Where
Yeah. You get
Lula
no
was just
points. You get no points from the referee in the sky for playing clean.
exactly,
It's about power.
exactly,
You know, it's about power and exercising power. And like you said, in Brazil and in America, like don't let's not like pretend
exactly,
this is like
exactly.
some fucking like third world shit. Like in America, patronage systems are how you exercise power. Certain people control patronage systems that you gotta the money's got to flow in order to make certain things happen. I think like if you look at the Democratic Party, they used to have these political machines that are essentially patronage systems that were a way to rally votes, and often it was by delivering concrete benefits to certain people. They saw that as corruption. I mean, right now the Democratic Party consultant class is the machine. That is the grift. You got to pay those people off. We don't
Hmm.
call that corruption, but if you want to be in power in Democratic Party politics, you got to pay off a whole lot of people. How do they do it? They just basically hire them as consultant, pay them millions of
To do
dollars
no work.
to do no work, to buy some fucking ads on TV, to produce like the most boring ads in the fucking universe. Like that's the grift.
Yep.
That we don't call that corruption, but that's the same thing. Is that like you need to grease some hands in order to exercise power. To be like kind of pure about that, you're just never gonna achieve it. So Lula, the reason that Lula is such a political genius and really like a one of a kind type of guy is that he is able to keep his eye on the ball of power while still maintaining enough of a social conscience
Mm.
and a sort of ideological rigor to make people's lives better. To be frank, because you could be perfectly you can have perfect politics or perfect ideology, but then once you're faced with the realities of exercising power, those two things often come in conflict, and you got to be able to navigate that. Lula, and what often happens is people get into politics with like good intentions. Like I'm thinking of that guy Kevin De Leon in LA, who
Mm.
was one that racist. Apparently when he
Mhm.
was young, he was like this like fire, like you know what I mean. Then he got in there and he became a corrupt asshole, and he's like he's like just and that's a very easy process to happen too. So to sort of get your hands dirty enough to be able to exercise power to lift people's lives better while still maintaining a certain modicum of a social conscience and a long-term vision and staying true to yourself without losing yourself in the weeds of that shit is unbelievably difficult. Most people can't do it. Lula is able to do it better than almost anyone else.
Man, so beautifully said. I think the last thing that I want to hit on with this is like I think a lot of times we fall into the trap of assigning meaning, a broader meaning to individual events, but is there anything to be gleaned from this? Like what's the meaning of this for Lula to come back and take the presidency from Brazil's elites again?
Well, I mean, I think one of the reasons it's actually I think one of the reasons why he was able to come back, or part of his political maneuvering, is that he actually had quite a bit of support from the ultra elites. Because the
Mm,
ultra elites, I think Bolsonaro, they just lost confidence in him. You know
mm.
what I mean? That he was just so comically inept. Um, that even the elites kind of lost confidence in him, and they remember Lula. Like life was pretty good for them under Lula. As much as mad as he made them, like the money was flowing pretty nicely as well. So Lula has crafted this kind of coalition of like working class people, especially in certain parts of the country, like the Northeast and in the urban centers, plus like the elite. It's the rural people that really supported Bolsonaro, and the suburbs is where Bolsonarismo is really strong, and also near the Amazon, ironically, is where Bolsonaro is incredibly strong, um, which is counterintuitive, but it also makes kind of sense. Those extracting resources from the Amazon is what's going to make those people their livelihood. You know, um, but I think there are kind of lessons to be learned, both in terms of the power of this kind of revanchist far right is definitely stronger than we'd like.
Mhm.
Bolsonaro got way closer than would be comfortable. I mean, it was a
Mhm.
fucking tight election. You
Mhm.
know, despite his comically inept handling of COVID, despite he himself getting COVID like 12 times, you know, you know, um, and he got really close. And this phenomena that I'm talking about rich people plus kind of like a certain type of working class people in the cities voting kind of progressive, whereas people in rural centers and the suburbs, middle classes, but also poor people in the rural areas,
In the
voting like
countryside, yeah.
insane far right. You know,
Mhm.
happens in the United States, happens in
Yep.
Europe. It's happening kind of everywhere. So there's definitely something more structural going on. And then the other big thing is that Lula is the kind of crown jewel in a way of what's an emerging kind of left wing resurgence in Latin
Latin
America. The
America.
left is on the retreat everywhere in the world. Everywhere, the left is being just crushed everywhere, except in Latin America. They won Brazil, they control Argentina, control Bolivia. They lost in Ecuador, but one in Peru, although he's in trouble. That guy. One in Colombia, which is an insane far right
Insane.
country forever. Never
Mhm.
won a left wing president. Never won. Obviously, Cuba and Honduras, and plus don't forget Mexico, AMLO. So the largest economies in Latin America are Brazil and Mexico, both controlled by kind of pretty based left wing, savvy political operators. Dude, fucking AMLO. I was talking about it in the live show, the Ben Burgess show. AMLO, he's on his like last year in office. Dude has a 66% approval rating
That's incredible. I don't think
despite
we'll
like
ever was
constant attacks from fucking the elite, the media, everyone fucking hates him.
do you think
66% approval.
when will we see another president in America get 66% approval rating?
It seems unthinkable
It
now
seems
unless
impossible. I'm sure
Bern
things changed,
yeah,
but like, god damn, dude.
you need someone that you need it only happens when someone delivers the goods for working people,
Yeah,
you know? You know what I
there you
mean?
go. The message, the message endures. Man, thank you, Nando. Of course, as always, shouts to everybody. Check out the Patreon, man. We're bringing some new stuff to that. The OG shows. Make sure you're checking out the newer content that we're bringing to Patreon. Of course, that's patreon.com/count the dings. Check out all of our other count the dings offerings. That's for $5 a month, essentially, man. Cup of Starbucks a month. Go support us on Patreon. We'll see you guys next week. Peace.